Gospel according to Luke. As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voices, saying, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." As they were going, they were cleansed. And one of them, realizing he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice. And he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? Then he said to them, "Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you." The Gospel of the Lord. Tonight we have the Gospel of the 10 lepers. I think this is a Gospel that many of us are familiar with. Heard it more than a few times, coming on the heels of last week. If you remember last week, the disciples asked Jesus, "Please increase our faith." They were asking this in response to the browbeating that the Pharisees were receiving. They were a bit nervous. If their own religious leaderships, they didn't get it, then where did that put them? So they were asking, "Increase our faith." And Jesus answered in such a way that, instead of always asking me for something, why don't you focus in on doing the will of my Father? And isn't that true? Our palms are generally always up when we pray. There's 3 basic prayers. There's help, there's thanks, and there's wow. And I think most of us spend our time in the help category, don't we? Isn't it true? Our gospel today has Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. He's on his way to his own death. He knows this. And as he's entering the town, he meets these 10 lepers at the gate. This, of course, would make sense. Leprosy making you the ultimate outcast. In Leviticus, it's very clear that if somebody has leprosy, which is a skin disease, then you're to be banished from the people, banished from the town. You had to wear torn clothing. You had to shout out when anybody approached, "Unclean, unclean." Oftentimes, you would have to wear a bell around your neck and ring it so that people would know when they came close to you that you were, in fact, a leper. I imagine that did a tremendous amount for one's ego. To ring a bell, "Unclean, stay away from me, stay away from me," but that's how it was. And so, of course, they're from a distance, they're crying out, "Jesus, Lord, have pity on us. Have pity on us." I don't know how, but they had heard about Jesus, this miracle healer out of Nazareth, so they're calling out to him. And it says that Jesus saw them. Small detail, but significant. Because do we really see those who are unfortunate, those who are begging, those with some kind of disability? We might see them, but do we really see them? Because in many cases, it seems that the unfortunate, those who are begging, those who are kind of the lower end of the social scale, are almost invisible, particularly if you have a disability. I remember my brother he told me this story. It's always kind of stuck with me. He had a terrible accident, a motorcycle accident, where he was in a wheelchair for about a year. And since he was in a wheelchair for that long of a time, he understood what it's like to be in a wheelchair. So when he sees somebody else in a wheelchair, he looks at him and he goes up and says, what happened to you? And oftentimes he says, they will look at me and I say, well, you must have been in a wheelchair yourself. Because you see everybody else, they're invisible. And there's a reason for that. Because you see, we don't want to stare, right? You see somebody with disability, then we pretend like we don't see them. And we're doing this for good motives because we don't want to be like, children, of course, they stare, they don't care. Look at him, he's in a wheelchair. Look at that person, he's the only guy same thing, and then we look, because we don't want to offend them. But what happens is they become invisible. I bring that to your attention because Jesus wasn't invisible to them. He sees them. He sees them, and he goes after them. And he says, go and show yourself to the priest. This, of course, makes sense because only the Levitical priest could declare them clean. In Leviticus, there's also a law that if somebody comes that has leprosy, the priest, first of all, they have to shave their entire body and then be inspected every inch by the priest. And then go through a week-long ritual cleansing and then come back after a week and then they're inspected again. And if no sores or redness is identified, then the priest, and only the priest, can declare them clean. Now, when they're declared clean, then they're completely restored. Not only to their own family, but to their town, and of course to the synagogue. Because they're banned from the synagogue, which to some people might be a favor, right? They want to go to church. But in the ancient world, the synagogue was the center of all social activity. So it was complete restoration. Sort of like the prodigal son, when he got the ring on the finger and the sandals on his feet and the robe. Okay, complete restoration. In the same way, that's what happened when they were healed. Now, we know how it happens. They all go off to get healed, and they get all cleansed, and then 9 of them go on their merry way, and 1 comes back. In fact, we could rename this gospel as the 9 ungrateful former lepers, really. And it's gee whiz, I'll tell you what, those people are. I can't believe they didn't come back. Thank Jesus. That wouldn't be me. Thank God nobody like that around here. But hold on there, Sparky. How many of us have been backed into a corner, had a terrible fortune befall us, and we're screaming out, Lord, have mercy, help me. I don't know if there's any way out of this. And the Lord does come to our rescue. And then what happens? Forget about it. What's for lunch? We just kind of move on our life, you know. Isn't that true? But you see, there's another issue here that maybe goes unnoticed. See, when they're all lepers, they're all lepers. There's no distinction. There's no Jew leper or Gentile leper or Samaritan leper. You're just a leper because you're the outcast. But once they were cleansed, they weren't 10 lepers anymore. There were 9 Jews and a Samaritan. All of a sudden, the class distinction turns. Now, we've talked about this a time or two before, but you know, the Samaritans are hated by the Jews. They're hated by the Jews because of the history of Assyria conquering Israel and conquering a particular area in the northern Israel where they populated some of the Syrian forces. They took away most of the able-bodied men, and some remained, and some of the soldiers got together with the Jewish women, and they had children, and they created in the mind of the Jew a mixed breed, a traitorous, lecherous people, dirty dogs in their eyes. Now they had kind of a hybrid religion that was sort of like Judaism. They claimed Abraham to be their father, but they worshiped on the mountain. We hear all about this with the woman at the well. But the bottom line is, they're hated. And once they were all healed, there were 9 Jews, and there was 1 Samaritan. Now remember, Jesus said, go show yourself to the priest. Where is the priest? He's in the temple. Can the Jews go to the temple? Of course they can. Can the Samaritan go to the temple? No. Why? Because the Samaritans are banned from the temple. So the other 9 at this point might be waiting in the lobby at the temple, waiting to do what Jesus told them to do, which is show themselves to the priest, just following the rules, doing what they did. And the Samaritan, he couldn't do that because he's not allowed. So maybe they have a good excuse for not coming back. I don't know. It's confusing because Jesus does say, where are the other 9? So it seems like he's a little disappointed. And I think that the clue comes from what the Samaritan does. The Samaritan comes back and he falls to his knees and he glorifies Jesus. Glorifies. The Greek word in that translation is Eucharistin, which is, of course, where we get the Eucharist, which is what we call the wafer that becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Eucharist is translated loosely as thanksgiving. Thanksgiving with an overtone of forgiveness, right? So we're thankful that we're forgiven. So the fact that they use this word might suggest that this Samaritan took that gratitude of not only his healing, but realizing Jesus for who he was, because he had, like Peter did on the Mount Caesarea Philippi, illumination. So he was illuminated, and he allowed that gratitude to transform him. What about you? What about me? Do we allow our gratitude to transform us? Or do we just do what we do? Because in the end, that's really what it's all about. We can sit here and say we believe in Jesus, and that's great. But the devil believes in Jesus. Do we allow it to transform us in the way that we live? And how does that look? Well, how does gratitude look? Well, it looks like service, really. Service to other people that are in need. Being present to people that need you. Doing the kingdom work. Helping people in a tight spot if you can. Sometimes that involves your money. Sometimes that involves your time. Sometimes it involves just listening to somebody. What is it? Let us learn from the Samaritan of this gospel and allow our gratitude to transform us in the way that we live. Let us stand and profess our faith.